All right, let's dive into something that, on the surface, seems pretty straightforward: the farming of oil palm and sorghum in ancient Sudan. Sounds simple enough, right? But as we're about to find out, this little fact is hiding a much bigger and way more interesting story.
But you know how it is with history, right? A simple fact is almost never that simple. So we have to ask the question, is the story of these two plants in Sudan really as cut and dry as it sounds?
Our source material just puts it perfectly. It says the answer is only half straightforward. So that's the puzzle we're tackling today. Which half is true, and which half gets a lot more complicated.
To get to the bottom of this, you've got to understand that this is really a tale of two completely different plants. And the absolute key to figuring it all out? It's the environment. Ancient farmers in Sudan were dealing with a really diverse landscape, everything from the rich Nile Valley to the super dry Sahel. And they knew better than anyone that you can't just grow anything anywhere. So let's start with the real star of the show here, the absolute hero of ancient Sudanese farming, sorghum. This grain wasn't just another crop. Nope, it was the crop. And there was a very, very good reason for that. It was basically tailor-made for the place. I mean, this comparison says it all. You look at something like wheat or barley, and they need cooler, wetter weather to grow. But sorghum, it's a total powerhouse of resilience. It's built for heat, it can handle rain that you can't count on, and that gave the ancient communities living in the Sahel a huge, huge advantage.
So how in the world do we know all of this? Well, this is where it gets really cool, because the story turns into a kind of detective case. You have archaeologists piecing together these tiny, tiny clues to uncover this massive chapter in human history.
And as you can see from this timeline, the domestication of sorghum was a marathon, definitely not a sprint. We're talking about a process that took thousands of years. It starts way back in the 4th millennium BCE, with people just kind of managing the wild stuff. Then, over generations and generations of farmers picking the plants with the best traits, it slowly gets transformed into a true farmed crop by the 2nd millennium BCE.
And you could almost picture how this would have happened, right? It was probably really intuitive. You start by just gathering the wild grain. Then you notice some patches are better than others, so you start protecting them, maybe weeding around them. The next logical step, you start saving seeds from those best plants and sowing them on purpose. You do that for hundreds, even thousands of years, and those tiny choices completely reshape the plant into a whole new crop.
So where's the proof? Well, archaeologists have this incredible toolkit at their disposal. Sure, they find the obvious stuff like charred grains from old campfires or impressions of seeds baked into pottery. But the real game changers are microscopic. We're talking about things like phytoliths, these tiny fossilized plant bits, and even finding traces of food that got trapped in the plaque on ancient teeth. It's amazing stuff.
Okay, so that's the story for sorghum. Now, let's pivot and talk about our second plant, the oil palm. And as you're about to see, its connection to ancient Sudan is totally different. Oil palm was absolutely an important crop, just not in the way you might be thinking.
This table just lays it all out, crystal clear. Look at the environment. Sorghum loves the dry Sahel of Sudan. Oil palm needs the wet, humid tropics you find in West and Central Africa. That right there dictates everything. So in Sudan, sorghum was a true staple crop, while oil palm's role was much more limited. And the evidence reflects that perfectly. For sorghum, the proof is direct, it's strong. For oil palm, it's pretty much inferred through trade.
So here it is, the crucial point. Oil palm was a huge deal in other parts of Africa, but it almost certainly wasn't being grown in ancient Sudanese fields. What happened instead is that its products, like super valuable palm oil, were brought into Sudan through these long-distance trade networks. And that's about more than just food. It's about connecting different cultures and economies across the entire continent.
Okay, so we've got two plants, two very different stories in Sudan. But why does this actually matter? Who cares? Well, it matters because this is about so much more than just a couple of crops. It tells us something really big about how we should look at history.
It matters because the story of sorghum and Sudan is this perfect example of local agricultural innovation. This isn't a story about people just borrowing an idea that came from somewhere else. No, this is about communities becoming true experts in their own backyard, watching, experimenting, and coming up with their own unique solutions to feed themselves. It's about ingenuity, not just imitation.
And that leads us to this really powerful conclusion from the source material. The history of sorghum is solid proof that ancient African communities were active, brilliant innovators.
This is so important because it pushes back against these old, outdated ideas that Africa was just passively receiving ideas from other places. This shows people were shaping their own futures and solving their own problems.
So let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways? First, agriculture is always shaped by the local environment. Second, ancient people weren't simple. They were incredibly sophisticated problem solvers. Third, Sudan was a major center of innovation for one of Africa's most important grain crops. And finally, and maybe most importantly, history is almost never simple. The really interesting stuff is usually hiding just beneath the surface.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. When you uncover the real, nuanced story of sorghum and oil palm in Sudan, it can't help but make you wonder. What other parts of history, in Africa or anywhere else in the world, have we just accepted as a simple summary? What other incredible stories of innovation are just waiting for us to dig a little deeper?